Hello, Minister MaLunga. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
You're the Minister of Natural Resources, Energy and the Environment from Malawi. Could you tell me how you're finding the COP negotiations this time round?
I mean, in terms of the progress so far?
The progress and maybe the ambition.
Well, I think we need to rethink the whole process of negotiation. I see that there's a lot of dynamism, there's a lot of politics, there's a lot of science, and all these things need to be properly integrated and utilized. What I've noted here is that there are so many interest groups, and when you have so many interest groups, becomes very difficult to converge, to come up with a compromise text that can guide the world in combating climate change. So there is a real need to relook at the convention in terms of composition of countries. You know, if you look at the convention, we have two parties. We have the Annex 1 party and then we have the Annex 2 parties. But now, over the years, what has emerged is that you will notice that even in the Annex 2 parties, there are levels of development. And this has brought a lot of challenges in terms of negotiating in favor of the least developed countries. Because you can see that there are issues related with the commitment, monitoring, reporting, and verification, which is affecting a few other countries like, you have Brazil, India, China, and South Africa, who are more above the other least developed countries. And it becomes very difficult to accommodate a group that has got transitional countries and then the poorest countries, and then you have the developed countries to come up to an agreement in terms of how they commit themselves to combat climate change. You will notice that even among the Annex 2 countries, you have different, commitments and impacts. Within the Annex 2 countries, you will find out that most countries, the poorest countries, their issue is adaptation. And very few countries are talking about, mitigation. So you will see that the developed countries don't want to take advantage of mitigation issues in the Annex 2 countries, which is an issue really for very few countries within the Annex 2 countries. And I believe that there is a need for a proper give and take sort of
I completely understand what you're saying, but I don't understand what that solution would be.
The best solution is to understand that within the Annex 2 countries, there are issues of mitigation and adaptation. And it is becoming very apparent that the developed countries are more interested in mitigation than adaptation. For example, look at Africa. Most of the countries in Africa depend on primary industry, which is agriculture. And now, because of the challenges that they have in terms of drought-related activities induced by climate change activities, most communities now are surviving through overexploitation of natural resources, such as forests, not only for their energy, but also for their livelihood. So for us to help these communities, to put less pressure on natural resources, there is need to help them with adaptation to climate change. That is, improve on their food security. So the issue for Africa really is adaptation and not mitigation. Now, if the developed countries, the Annex 1 countries, are taking advantage of the existence of the countries, such as Brazil, South Africa, India, and China, that are developing faster than the other countries, they are using that as a means of suppressing progress in these climate change negotiations. I think this is very unfortunate. There is a need for the developed countries to understand that the majority in Annex 2 countries, their issues are adaptation and not mitigation. These simple issues can be negotiated, in a different way, rather than, slowing progress, which we want to see here in Cancun.
And so, in terms of Malawi, how is Malawi doing at the moment?
Malawi, as a country, realizing that the impacts of climate change are real and that they contribute adversely to the economic growth of the country, the government has come up with priority areas, about 9 of them, that are guiding the economic development in Malawi. And one of them is natural resources, energy and environment. Realizing that natural resources, energy and environment really have a great impact in terms of livelihood for our people. You will notice that Malawi, we have communities that are heavily dependent on subsistence agriculture and rain-fed agriculture. So the challenge that we have are the erratic rains, whereby you have persistent droughts, sometimes you have intense rainfall, and that brings a lot of floods, and whatever has been grown is lost. So that is the challenge that we have. The other thing that we are trying to cope with is how do we manage our natural resources, especially the fisheries sector, because our main source of protein in Malawi, about 60%, comes from fish. Now with these climate change impacts, our rivers are drying, and then the habitats for breeding of fish also are affected, and this brings a lot of challenge in terms of food security and food nutrition. The other issues that confront us is the actual issue of energy. You know, the country, our source of energy, about 97% is biomass, and with 93%, so 7% is from hydropower and then renewable energy. The challenge that comes in now is how do we protect our forests as a source of energy, for the greater part of the population. So this is where now we need a lot of assistance in terms of how do we get the funding to make sure that we have alternative sources of livelihood, alternative sources of energy. And if you look at it, it's really a secular problem, because the moment you start over-exploiting forests, it means you are affecting the catchment areas for water. And now, because we rely heavily on hydropower, it means the rivers, when they dry, will have no electricity. So there's need to balance all these things. And what is required are the available resources. And all these impacts are coming in, not because of our own making. It's because of the developed countries, because of the way they developed. Nobody monitored them, and they continue to release a lot of greenhouse gas emissions. So that is affecting us. This is why we are saying financing issues are also important for the developing countries to be assisted to mitigate and adapt against climate change.
Where are we with the financing issues? Because there were some pledges that were made in Copenhagen. Were they enough, and have they started to flow through?
Something to rush to in terms of having a political solution. I think it's not the best in a world that is more scientific and more economic oriented. The Copenhagen Accord to us really did not give us really a proper alternative source of funding. If you look at the 30 billion that was pledged, less than 20% has been made available. And there are no proper mechanisms as to how that 20% can be accessed. So it's still a nightmare. We don't know where the money is. And the people there continue to suffer, against the effects of climate change.
Is there anything that you think you can take away from Cancun that's going to be good?
I would have very much loved that here in Cancun, we lay grounds for continued second period of commitment, that is the Kyoto Protocol, must continue. And then the Bali Action Plan is very important to us, because that's what gives us the basis for longer-term cooperative action in terms of planning. And the Kyoto Protocol gives us guidance in terms of commitments, by both parties, the Annex 1 and Annex 2 countries, in terms of how do we reduce greenhouse gas emissions. But we need scientific evidence, and this scientific evidence is in the Kyoto Protocol. Now, what we see now is people here are fighting over procedural issues, not necessarily the real issues that are going to help us come up with a resolution in terms of coming up with a legally binding agreement in terms of how we mitigate and adapt to climate change.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.